Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to Hodge Pod, a podcast that brings together people of diverse disciplines to talk about how we can move the world forward in a better way for all humanity and the planet. That's my goal, that's my dream. And today our conversation is called A Jazz Recipe because Hodge Podge is a soup. And today I'm having a cashew ginger carrot soup. And so if you guys have any good soup recipes, send them my way too. And it's the idea of bringing together this idea of a broth. The broth is jazz at this point, music. And the ingredients are my guests and what we're going to talk about. And I want to introduce my guest today, my very special guest, and thank you all for being here. Jordannah Elizabeth. Hey. She's a writer, author, and a cultural critic whose work explores music, identity, and the stories we tell about culture and creativity. She's the author of Don't Lose Track and She Raised Her Voice. And she's widely known for her thoughtful writing on music, race, and representation. Through essays, interviews, and books, Jordannah brings deep insight and care to the ways music shapes personal and collective history. So thank you, Jordannah, for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Oh, great. Martin Rosenberg, hey Martin, is a researcher, academic, and musician whose work sits at the intersection of music, improvisation, and neuroscience. He has published research on jazz improvisation, including a chapter titled Jazz as Narrative, Narrating Cognitive Processes Involved in Jazz Improvisation, where he explores how musicians think, listen, and respond in real time. Drawing on both scholarship and lived musical practice, his work frames improvisation not just as an art form, but as a deeply social and cognitive process, and one that sheds light on communication, creativity, and human connection. Thank you, Martin, for being here. And Marcus Shelby is an acclaimed jazz bassist, composer, band leader, and educator based in San Francisco, California. He's deeply rooted in the African-American musical tradition. His work bridges jazz, blues, gospel, and orchestral composition, often centering on Black history, social justice, and community healing. Marcus is widely known for large-scale works such as Port Chicago, Soul of the Movement, and Black Lives Matter, which combine music, narration, and historical storytelling. In addition to performing internationally, he is a dedicated educator and cultural advocate, using music as a tool for liberation, remembrance, and collective transformation. So thanks for being here, Marcus.
Thank you.
So our recipe is mixing improvisation, neuroscience, community, and radical resistance, because there's a connection between all of these when we talk about jazz music or blues. So what's cooking, on the stove here? The central question is, how is jazz a blueprint for creativity, community building, and liberation that extends far beyond music? So we're framing the journey from African traditions, survival and resistance, rewiring our brains, and building our future. So this is to everybody. What does jazz teach us about freedom, not just musical freedom, but as a broader concept? How might neural patterns form improvisational music translate to problem solving, social interaction, and adaptation to change? So these are the kinds of questions we're gonna go, ask today, and just have a conversation about it from your own experiences, our own collective experiences, and how do we see that moving forward?
Yeah, I'll begin. It's funny because it's kind of two-pronged, but I was thinking, this year is my 40th year, and I'm certainly kind of the baby in the jazz scene, the jazz journalist scene. But I think the root and the gift of being African American is that jazz and blues really was just everywhere in my house. My grandfather had, Louis Armstrong and Louis Armstrong, as you say, and Count Basie, and kind of all of this music, Miles Davis, and all of this music that kind of flowed through my life. My mother loved Cassandra Wilson and Ava Cassidy and all of these things. So this was the music that I grew up to, and I think that the gift of it when it comes to freedom. And I was thinking when you were talking about it, when it comes to freedom, or paired with that, both of my parents, my father's a preacher, both of my parents never told me as an African American girl from Baltimore City that I couldn't do something. That I had two brothers. They didn't say they're boys and you're a girl. Maybe one time out of my whole, they're
Wow.
boy, you're a girl. You can't go here. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't write about rock and roll. You can't write about jazz. So I think the pairing personally for me when it comes to freedom, community, and resistance, and when it comes to generally freedom within the orb of jazz, is that culmination of here is the music, just let it flow through you, Nina Simone, all of these things, and no conversation of what you cannot do. And I think that those brought a lot of freedom and grace, within my exploration of my career.
Yeah, I am interested in this idea of improvisation, and I'm sure some of us understand this, is something that is not always comfortable for people, and yet we do it every day. I mean, I don't know what you're going to say, you don't know what I'm going to say, and yet when we get to music, sometimes people get nervous about using improvisation, but I think it's something that music, in terms of jazz music or any music that is improvisational, teaches us how to be more free, how to be more in the moment, how to respond to each, how to listen to each other. And so what you're talking about is having that music around you that created this sense of self-awareness and the ability to want to be able to do things by just being around the music. Does that sound like something that would resonate with any of you?
Absolutely. Um, if I could widen um, the bandwidth a little bit, or maybe use a wide angle lens, I came uh, I was a jazz musician for a little while before I decided to go back to school. And then I picked it up again a long time later when I started writing about jazz. But my original interest was in freedom as a law of nature. And I started out writing as a cultural historian of the concept of emergence or self-organization, and actually studied the physics and the chemistry and the biology of emergent processes, and then looked at how artists and philosophers throughout the 20th century were really riveted and gravitated toward these manifestations of science as a resource to help describe resistance to dominant culture. And
Mm.
from there, I drifted into African American music as a way to talk about that resistance to marginality, which one could associate with avant-garde artists, as well as philosophers, and then looked at how jazz seems to manifest the principles of self-organization or emergence in ways that are visible extrinsically, in even in music notation, and then at the level of cognitive science, at the processes of emergence at the level of mind. And so, from that wide angle lens, I can now focus in on the fact that I see jazz and work with jazz as a model for describing not just processes of emergence, but processes of a resistance to domination. and I do so at a very fine level. Within music, at the level of melody, harmony, harmonic rhythm, and percussive rhythm, but also at the level of cognition, where I talk about in political as well as aesthetic terms the difference between top-down control and bottom-up emergence, and look at the notion of creativity in that light. So that might be a little bit better frame for what I do. And let me stop there to give other people a chance to enter into the conversation. I hope that was helpful.
Mm-hmm. It was really helpful. Thank you. And so many things to kind of were for me to start. And I think one of the questions I start with is this notion of what is jazz? And if we were to kind of take a secret poll and write down what we think jazz is, we might have 4 different answers. Mm-hmm. So I've been struggling with that in my 36-year career on what is jazz, and is that the starting point of what we're talking about? I actually think it begins with the blues. When all the things that we're talking about, improvisation, all the things that we're talking about, the things you were talking about, Mr. Rosenberg, was really amazing, because I think about that the same way with melody, with harmony, with rhythm. But I do add one more, and that's timbre and tone color, because to me, that might be the most unique thing that an individual has, is their sound. When we think about a musician like John Coltrane or Bessie Smith or Ma Rainey or Billie Holiday or Tom Waits or someone with a very unique voice, it's their voice that is the thing that we're attracted to, their timbre, their sound. The rhythm could be great, their harmony could be awesome, their melody could be superior, but I think even Coltrane was noted for his sheets of sound. And so that 4th thing to me is really important. But I go back to the blues, because the blues to me really sits underneath all the music that we're talking about, whether it's jazz, whether it's rock and roll, whether it's hip hop and soul, whether it's funk. It's really the roots of all of that. And it contains everything from the work song, or the field holler, or the blues cry, or the spiritual, the complaint call, that then collides with all of these other influences, and in some cases cultures, to create all this American-born music. And the blues to me is very simple. I'm not talking about the style blues. I'm talking about the blues in the sense of harmonic tension, rhythmic tension, melodic tension, and certainly timbre and release. Tension and release. That is the blues as an idea of how you create emotion, how you resolve that, how you move through that. And there's another definition of the blues I think is sort of an interesting way to think about it, is the pursuit of freedom. The pursuit, because at times with the history of the creators of this art form, since the beginning, there's been this pursuit of freedom, freedom of melody, freedom of how you interpret harmony. That's why this scholarship of trying to understand, how do you get the sound of the blues? Freedom of rhythm, polyrhythms, superimposed rhythms, 3 against 4, African rhythms that create swing, freedom of, and then of course, freedom of timbre. And why we like someone like Billie Holiday, and at the same time, we love someone like Ella Fitzgerald. So the blues really kind of fills all of that up, and including jazz. And I only say that because that helps me try to understand all the other things that I think we're going to talk about, and try to understand when it comes to community, when it comes to communication, when it comes to improvisation, when it comes to how that symbolizes all of that.
You know, I'm even, and I totally agree with you, even in a broader context, it's the human desire for expression and communication. And when I think of the blues and I think of the history of the blues, and I'm not a scholar in this area, but my understanding is some of the language of the blues, singing the blues, was to communicate messages, and of course the issues that people were going through. And I think that's really a significant part of it too, is that, and even when we talk about the blues, you know, contemporarily, go, oh, you have the blues, what does that mean? Well, that comes from a very long history of people being able to express what they could not express themselves. And they could only do it through the music. And that, to me, is the power of this music. And I'm with you 100%, because I was going to actually say the same thing, is that I think it all starts with the blues, because that was the primal form of communication, at least in our society, and the restrictions that were placed on people. And also on the other side of that is the incredible creativity that came out of people who were restricted on being able to do what was naturally in them as a human being, and to be able to create new instruments, new ways of expressing themselves. And I think that's a human, something we can look at in terms of when I was talking about looking, how do we move forward? These are ways that we can learn from the past of how people moved forward. Music is a powerful, powerful tool. Somebody said, you can burn books, but you can't stop people from singing. That's a powerful statement. We can still carry messages and ideas through our voices, and our instruments.
I think it's crazy because I've been having these parallel thoughts, and honestly, to prepare for this show, I did a little bit of research on Mr. Rosenberg's complete work, and I don't know why lately, because I tend to really be caring of the people around me, and I don't actually kind of internalize things a lot. But I've been thinking about personal attributions, even within the broader sense. And when I read the research about the combination of how cognition, when improvisation happens, it's a lack of functionality, where you don't have this ability to kind of put things in order. And I think it was like default mode, right? So your brain has this lack of kind of organization, a default mode, which gives you free spontaneity, right? When you're improvising. So I thought, like, how does a musician work? When you're young, you think, okay, I'm weird, something wrong with me. so you start to understand, like, my brain is not normal. That's why a lot of musicians are called bipolar. They're called, I've been told, cognitive behavioral. So do that, and then you go, I'm weird. And then you start to get older and you say, how do I organize my process? How do I organize my routine? Do I play my trumpet 14 hours a day, eat here, do this? That's why when you meet a lot of musicians at certain points of their career, they have their day and their routine and their life very organized. And then once you get to a place where you have those two things organized, okay, I'm weird, here's my structure, then you start to come back into your improvisation, and you have your space within that, without being able to improvise without flying off the handle, or not being able to go back into your functionality. I'm an adult, I have to eat here, I have to do here, I have to get the car fixed, I have to do that. So that's what I thought about when it comes to Mr. Rosenberg, Dr. Rosenberg's work. And then at the other end of blues, Ellen had said something about expressing something that's already within you. And when I sing the blues, it's the strangest thing. I think as an African American, it comes out in this way that even I don't expect. It's this soulful, natural thing. Well, how'd you do that? How'd you sing that? I do not know. And I was talking to my husband about how which branches we took with jazz. I decided to go and really implement jazz from the 1920s to about the 1940s to about 1950s at the latest. And he was very interested in, the British form, and then rock and roll form, Vaughan and Stevie Ray Vaughan and Eric Clapton and all those things, when I was interested in, Sun House and Lead Belly and, and so on. So, that's been the conversation of like the route you can take. And we went to two different spectrums, but the I think the center of it is the soulfulness, the narrative, and the story, and the pain or whatever it is in there. But those are the two prongs, two thoughts that I've had, in listening.
Well, I have a question for you, Martin. Is in the music of the blues, there's a lot of call and response, and I'm wondering if that's something, or if there's something you can tell us about what might be happening to us neurologically when we're participating in this call and response. Is that something that's just natural for human beings to do, or is there something going on in our brains that makes us want to do that, or better at doing it, or anything that you could share in that regard?
Yes, if I could go back to what Marcus was saying, and that's also Jordannah, if that's pronouncing your name correctly,
Correct.
Jordannah.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, what Marcus was describing was were tactics of resistance to cultural overlays. So when you're talking about blues timbre, by which an individual expresses their individuality, and when you talk about blues notes, and when you talk about polytonality and polyrhythms, what you're talking about are ways in which deviations spontaneously occur that tear at, or one might even say exist independently of the overlay of Western classical music, with the way in which time and pitch and sound are regimented in the context of the orchestra. And each of those dimensions, even if I could use them in terms of dimensions, and what I talked about before in terms of melody, harmony, harmonic rhythm, and percussive rhythm, and then adding timbre to that, which is something I haven't talked about, but I imply in a number of places in my writings that those are minimally the four dimensions. Obviously, there are other dimensions that we should consider, and timbre, I think, is a really crucial one. It's just that I haven't gotten there yet. But all of them focus on the notion of deviation from the norm, from what is dominant. And here I get back to the notion of emergence or self-organization. And emergence or self-organization is a concept that has to do with how does order occur spontaneously out of disorder? How does it emerge from? And one of the principles of emergence, one of the characteristics of emergence, is the notion of bifurcation. And somebody, I don't remember whether it was Marcus or Jordannah talked about a fork in the road, or maybe something like that. And that's what I'm talking about. Where does the deviation occur? At the level of melody, at the level of harmony, at the level of harmonic rhythm, at the level of percussive rhythm, at the level of timbre, which enables free expression beyond the regimented pathways of normal communication in the field of music.
Mm.
And that, to me, is one of the essences of what the blues is.
Mm.
Marcus, really
And
quick. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
I, I was listening to you and I was wondering, Marcus, about the deviation. Where does it start? I was thinking my limitation because my hands are really small. I can't quite play the guitar the way I'd like to, bar chords, all of those things. I am classically trained, but the blues comes out naturally. So I feel like where does the deviation come of when you do it your own way and your interpretation? I find it be many times. Sometimes you pay yourself down for your audiences or for whatever, for pop or whatever. But me, it's just straight up physical vocal limitations. So
Well, I always complained about the fact that I had small hands
yeah,
until I found out that Segovia had really tiny hands, and then I
Bronx, yeah.
stopped complaining.
Well, Jordannah, you and I have a similar background because my grandfather was a minister and I
Mhm.
grew up in the church. And my first musical experiences were playing what I now know were blues, blues music, 1-4-5 for the male chorus, almost every song at the age of 14, not knowing that that would be sort of the music that would be the foundation that I would pursue later.
Mhm.
But I internalized it. So much of the blues, there's a conflict. There's two books I want to recommend for all of us and for any listener. And one is Stompin' the Blues by Albert Murray. And he really draws the parallel between this art form, the blues, and the relationship with the Black church, and the dichotomy of the musicians who played both at Saturday night juke joint and Sunday morning. And so he really captures that. I'm not sure when it was published, but that's one book. The other one is Blues Legacies and Black Feminism
Oh
by
yeah.
Angela Davis,
Hmm.
which I think is probably the most articulate description of the blues and where it comes from. And from a social political standpoint of feminism, 40 years before the 1960s movements, you had people like Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Billie Holiday singing about liberation, women in a voice that had never been heard before, uh, these blues songs that were about love, were about homosexuality, they were about loss, they were about rage, they were about jealousy. We're talking 1920s, you know. And so that's a really good book. I would highly recommend that one as well. And I know we're kind of veering off maybe some of the original, what is, jazz and improvisation, but I think it's all the same thing. It's all coming from, it's actually maybe a little bit deeper in the soil of what we're talking about. Um, one more thing I wanted to bring up is just to be clear, because I think we all realize this, is that improvisation is not just free for all, make it up out of thin air.
Mm.
It's almost that we have this information inside of us, and we're able to the great improvisers that we can point to for whatever we define as great are able to access that information really quickly, organize that information. I mean, you mentioned that, you talked about that, Dr. Rosenberg. Organize that information and then reproduce it in a language, and do it quickly. So where is that happening? Is that happening in the rehearsal? Or in the practice, the woodshed? Is that happening because the person is physiologically just at a high level and able to do it? Maybe there's a combination of both. But it's not just, I'm just coming up with anything out of thin air. And I was with a bunch of kids this past week teaching Black History programming up in Hillsburg, and I was drawing the parallel between freestyle, which is a word that they know very well, and improvisation, which is the language that we use.
Well,
Those are,
oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that those are really, really great questions. And that actually gets back to what Ellen was asking me specifically about. But let me just stop there. And Ellen, why don't you continue what you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, in terms of improvisation, and something that you also mentioned, also Marcus, earlier, about having your own voice print. I think what, at least this is kind of how I explain it to my students, and I'll use the soup analogy again. But I mean, I think we come in with whatever essence we come in with, which is the unexplainable at that point. I mean, that's what we can look at, however you want to call it, the spiritual aspect or whatever that's within us. Like Jordannah, you mentioned, this thing comes out of me, I don't know where it's coming from. Yes, because we have something we come in with. And then we also are taking in all of these ingredients as we walk through life, and our influences. And our influences can be many. It can be many different kinds of music, sounds. It doesn't even have to just always be music. It can be something that, inspires you sound-wise. And then we put it into this, container, and that's what comes out. And if we've had some training in how to organize the improvisation to make some kind of, it's kind of like, well, we use this all the time in jazz. It's a language, right? So we develop our language to a point where it becomes more sophisticated and we can say more things. Then we've developed a language around it. And then within that language, if we can tap into who we are, and this sounds weird, but sort of get out of the way of the language at the same time we've learned it, then we come to this other level of, like, someone like John Coltrane, where we've now surpassed the language even, and we've gone to another level of expression. That's kind of how I interpret it, and I think that everybody brings something uniquely to the plate, and that's why I think it's important to never discourage anybody from whatever they like. I mean, I've met people that have surprised me with the things that they like to listen to. I mean, I've been surprised, but it's part of what's made them who they are in their expression, not only as a musician, but as a person. And that's what I think is the most fascinating thing about the connection of music and improvisation, is that it really expresses who we are and where we're growing to as well, because we're not stagnant, right? Because, I mean, Marcus, you're still learning, I'm still learning, Jordannah's still learning, we're still developing and learning. And so I find it to be such a great tool. And that's why I hope you don't mind if I'm calling you Martin instead of Dr. Rosenberg. I feel like I know you.
I've been called worse.
Okay. But, that's where Martin's work is so important to me, because it's an explanation of what we kind of already knew but weren't sure, or nobody really could define it, and we're still trying to in some ways define it. And whether we even need to define it is another question we could go into for hours. But I really appreciate that work, because it's things that I go, yes, that's why it's happening. Oh, I get it now. Okay, that's part of who we are. And so anyway, that's in terms of improvisation. Like, we're improvising right now because each one of us comes from a different background of information, and we're making music here by just talking to each other. And then from here, that's going to affect me and all of you, and maybe the people who listen, because now we're taking in some music,
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Well, I've been working with 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, sometimes even 6 months to 2-year-olds, and I've been learning from them when it comes to developmental. They have these. They have magnetiles. They have Legos, and I've been trying to and there's signs on our walls about cognitive behavior and all of these things, and even the 2-year-olds have instruments, and I kind of sit down and play rhythm with them. But I think they have been showing me a little bit more how to organize, because their designs are so out of the box. Using squares and using is one thing, but they can take triangles and turn it into 2 squares and make these different angles that I'm quite fascinated with. But before that, with I knew enough. I feel, and when I go back into the field of teaching, I try to go to the youngest kids I can to learn from. But I got to a point where I could teach university, and I was teaching a class of longevity. I am a young woman, but I have had a 20-year career. And the first thing I teach, and this goes back to kind of cognitive and putting it together and taking it apart, but routine is the first thing that I say. What is your daily routine? Write it down. Think about yourself. If you need to get up and check your email and look at social media for an hour, put that in your schedule. If you need to woodshed for 4 hours, if you've got homework, if you've got all this stuff, and it sounds annoying, but that's really the first week. How are you going to fit all this in? Because your rehearsal and your space, when it comes to getting to the major space or the top of the indie space, you are going to have to be extremely, extremely not only regimented, but your rehearsal is going to have to be very disciplined to the point where you can't always hang out. You can't always do this stuff. It's going to go from 2 hours to 6 hours to 8 hours when you have to prepare. You have these opportunities. So I try to get them there. But when it comes to improvisation and understanding and kind of building, I suffer from ADHD, and I just learned that I have learning disorders. I've always been very intelligent, but quietly I always felt like I had a broken wing because I was late diagnosed ADHD and had dyscalculia and certain things, which I somewhat hid through being an improvisation, being a songwriter, being a creative person. That's what got me through. So kind of balancing again in life and in music structure and being able to be yourself within a structure, to pay your bills, to to do certain things. I had to kind of be quite creative because there was just no diagnosis. So I find that learning cognitively, and then again going back in the field, and I appreciate the question for students of improvisation versus freestyle, because it's so nuanced and you want to get their brains thinking about those little things. When I don't drive, but when you buy a car, do you need 12-inch wheels? Do you need snow? Do you need four wheel drive? Do you need two? Do you need, what I mean? It helps you get to those nuances, and scholarship in music, those nuances of melody, timbre. So I really appreciate Marcus's work of defining, words that can seem quite maybe synonymous, like the same, but also those that small differentiation, getting them to go there so they can go there for the rest of their life.
I have a question actually for Dr. Rosenberg, and it would be like, if you had,
Please call me Martin.
okay, Martin, I'm sorry. I thought I was the wrong one, not using doctor. How would you like teach or tell someone from a mental standpoint, mind standpoint, how to improvise to a musician who was, say they could play, maybe they're not a great musician yet, but they want to learn how to improv. What would you tell them to think about and how to organize? Is that something that you might be able to share with someone from your work?
Um, I did used to teach guitar before I decided to go back to school.
Mm.
And what I would have them do is to learn some basic things. For example, we're talking about music store lessons.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have them learn the C scale,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would have them wander randomly, picking notes in that scale, teach them another scale, and have them do the same thing, and then have them try to switch back and forth between scales. In other words, what I'm describing is creating the least common denominator connection between creative impulse and technical structure, which would then enable them to begin to think musically from one note to another.
Mm.
And then gradually through time, build up technique, musical knowledge, and then the next stage of initial conditions for the possibility for musical thought to emerge for that student, given where that student was.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I could use this as a segue back to your original question, having to do with what state of mind do you have when you're practicing versus the state of mind that you have when you're on the bandstand.
Mm.
And this might blow your mind, but what I'm going to argue and what I think the evidence shows, both in terms of theoretical neuroscience as well as empirical neuroscience of music and the brain, if I can separate those two things, that your cognition is a multiplicity, that you are experiencing the world at different speeds. And I have a vocabulary for this in terms of music cognition. I call the kind of cognition necessary for practice, I call that projective apprehension, which is a really pretentious phrase, but which basically means just superimposing patterns, pathways on the instrument, and then through practice capturing them. That's what I mean by apprehension, capturing them in proprioception, or more generally muscle memory.
Mm.
And that's what's best. That requires very slow cognition.
Mm.
And there really is, and I'm talking about empirically, that there are different speeds by which you cognize the world. And so that form of cognition is associated with executive function, which is top-down conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get on the bandstand, the highest form of musical cognition is what I call propriosentience, where the thinking is actually taking place in the muscle memory, in proprioception, and requires an ability to dismantle executive function. And that occurs at very fast speeds and often occurs beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. And a classic example that I use for that form of propriosentience is in the famous performance by Stanley. No, they're two brothers. I'm 72, so I have memory lapses.
No, you just have a bigger file cabinet to go through.
Yeah.
Go through all of it.
Stanley and his brother, both from Pittsburgh, saxophone.
Oh, Turrentine.
Turrentine,
Turrentine.
yeah. So there's a famous song called Sugar.
Oh, yeah.
And in that song, there's a moment during Turrentine's solo, which is basically eighth notes and longer duration and eighth note triplets. And all of a sudden, George Benson throws out a flurry of 16th notes. And instantaneously, Turrentine responds at this other level of complication with respect to now I'm blanking again on another word. syncopation.
Ah.
And it happens so fast that Turrentine couldn't have the leisure of thinking about what to say next. And that really captures how propria sentience occurs. That in the first stage, where one is basically trying to capture pathways in proprioception on an instrument, here it's reverse engineered in some way where the sound triggers
really quickly.
The muscle memory.
As a music critic, because I want to learn when Marcus, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm freaking out because what you're describing, I feel like as a jazz critic, we call it chemistry. It's like it's like almost this, you don't have to, you are perfect because you really want to know how it's happened. And I think when you have 500 words and when you have 300 words, but I am always thinking about the band's chemistry. They almost have a psychic, emotional kind of symbiotic space.
Yeah, and I guess if I could interrupt you for a second, what I'm trying to get at is that a lot of people have been talking about this in largely spiritual terms. And I'm all for that. I'm a longtime meditator. I have my own, ethnic religious roots, but I'm really believe in global spiritual movements. So, but the science is caught up. And there are ways of describing what's going on in terms of contemporary cognitive science in a paradigm which people refer to as either the embodied or the inactive school of contemporary cognitive science, which incidentally has a lot of connection in terms of particular practitioners with Eastern philosophy as well. There's a book called The Embodied Mind, which was written in 1991, which was basically a manifesto of this new paradigm in cognitive science. And it's a book really about the connections between this embodied and active school of cognitive science and Mahayana Buddhist epistemology. And I don't mean to limit it just to a Mahayana Buddhist epistemology, but the connections were very precise. So what I'm talking about in terms of individual embodied cognition and also the interactivity of distributed cognition, this amongst the members of an ensemble, all of this can also be described, not to diminish the spiritual dimension to this. I mean, I got interested in jazz to begin with, having coming out of folk blues, as well as a little San Francisco rock and roll, if I can situate myself in a San Francisco mode. Was really Coltrane and Pharoah Sanders, particularly Pharoah Sanders, The Creator Has a Master Plan, which was a landmark performance for me growing up, which caused me really to turn from folk blues and folk rock to jazz. But this notion that there's slow cognition, there's fast cognition, which must occur beneath the threshold of conscious awareness because executive function cannot work at fast speeds. That jazz musicians are often caught between the two. And in my theorizing about all of this, I argue that this model gets proved in part through dysfunction, that this is a way to describe how all jazz musicians talk about experiencing the moment when they get lost in the middle of a performance. And I actually interviewed Dave Liebman about this, and he said the difference between a a neophyte like myself, for example, who can play, blues for Alice, and then suddenly realize that I'm off tempo, even off a bar or two, and not really discover it for, 3 or 4 bars. Someone at his level of experience can recognize where he is in the song form within a bar once he realizes he's lost, and that he will realize he is lost and get back on track within a bar. Uh, and that requires a certain default status cognition. So we actually have 3 forms of embodied cognition, which are functioning simultaneously during performance. Uh, and one can describe the difference between advanced African American jazz and free music with the fact that in jazz requiring um, a roadmap in the form of a song form as represented by the lead sheet of a song, or more complexly, with respect to an arrangement, one must maintain the awareness of the arrangement while one is playing. And yet sometimes both beginning players and advanced players one of the forms will overwhelm the other. And it's that default status that enables you to witness what's going on and then recognize that a balance has to occur again. Whereas in free jazz, what you're eliminating is that roadmap. So one aspires to the condition of being in what the cognitive scientist Francisco Varela calls the 1/10th scale of very fast cognition versus the 10 scale of maintaining that roadmap. And that one must bring them back and integrate them together again. And this occurs all the time, even if one aspires to the condition of playing free jazz, where a classic example that I use, and there are other examples that I could come with, someone more contemporary like Matthew Shipp, but I'm thinking Keith Jarrett in the Cone concert, where he's performing what is clearly the context is free jazz, and then in the middle of and fairly early on in the Cone concert, all of a sudden emerges from that slower 10 scale the song as if born from his head fully clothed like Athena out of Zeus. The tune Memories of Tomorrow suddenly emerges and becomes part of the landscape. And that's an example of that instability of those 3 forms of cognition where this already written song will spontaneously occur to him, even though that's probably wasn't where he really would prefer to be. He would prefer to be in that extremely fast cognition where there is no roadmap at all. And now I'll leave that. I don't want to talk too much. I want to take a step back, but I would like to talk at some point about distributed cognition in the ensemble, as well as going back to the notion of bifurcation and why that's so important in an understanding of both creativity and freedom. So let me stop there.
Well, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to comment a little bit on something you brought up, which I thought, in a parallel to the world of sports, often you hear the game slows down for them, and that's why, like the real elite players, when it's prime time, the game slows down for them and they're processing things because they're not rushed, they're not hurried, they're not sped up. And I think the same thing is happening, what you're talking about in the music world.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. If I could just interrupt, I actually cite at the end of one of my essays that Ellen mentioned, where I talk about that jazz has become a site that is convenient for witnessing the processes of creativity, because think about how difficult it would be to encase basketball players inside an fMRI and then send them down the court. I mean, it's,
See that. Yeah.
but what I'm saying is not
Mm.
not specific to jazz only. It's a human trait.
Mhm.
Anyway, I'll stop there. I
No,
didn't
Yeah, I was going to interject this idea of, and maybe this is to simplify some things. I hope it's related. Two things I wanted to say was when Jordannah, when you're talking about chemistry, I was going to say that, we can look at the universe and know what the stars are made of, but it's still magic. And that's how I look at it. There's still the magic, and that's what that's what like a lot of people like, that magic, and some of us want to understand what the magic is all about. And the other thing is this idea of, and it's an old Taoist idea, maybe farther back than that, is this idea of form and formless. And I think that I did a project called Form and Formless, and in regards, I don't have as much of the scientific understanding as you do, Martin, but my experience was, when I do improvisation and it's based on a form, there's a different place that I go to than when there's no form. And interesting enough, in the no form place, which I think is the most, it's interesting to me that, because I could be wrong about this, but I think most people are more afraid of the no form place than the form place, because there's something to hang on to. The no form place, you're kind of like, whoa, and you're really depending on yourself in a very I don't know, high level way to be there for you. And maybe it relates to somewhere cognitively, and maybe you can speak to this, is that whole idea of fight and flight and freeze, because sometimes when people are doing things that are frightening to them, they go to one of these three places. For me, what also happened for me, and when I was in the places I worked with, it was John Stoll, guitarist. Many of you know him, and he's easy to go out and do free things with. But it was like starting from nothing was like looking at a blank canvas. And I think about a lot of artists that you start with a blank canvas, and where do you go from there? And how do you even start? How do you continue? How do you end? Because it's all up to you at that point. When you have something that's given to you as a form, you have something to work off of, but you still are putting yourself into that. You still are putting those elements of what comes up in the moment for you within that structure. So I find both of them to be fascinating in terms of improvisation. And I think that if I related it to life, I would say that people who are more willing to take chances and risks tend to be on the formless end of that. And people who are really attached to structure are on the other end of it, because we do both. But that's how I kind of observe it in terms of life, if that makes sense to anybody here.
If I could, I'm sorry, Jordannah, go ahead.
Well, really quickly, I was thinking about time and space, and how I really kind of I'm lightly into physics. Sometimes I resist it. And part of this is resistance, like the bicycle. I'm not interested in how that works. But I think in time and space, when I work within my music, I try to create emotional ebbs and flows. I will slow down music. I will slow down myself. I will not necessarily move out. Well, I will move out of syncopation, out of beat, out of form. And it's not about promotion, particularly at this time. But I had to quickly interpret "In the Pines" by Lead Belly.
Mm-hmm.
And because I have a classical background, I've been taking blues and then breaking it down into a 3 note chords and intervals and things like that, and really simplification
Mhm.
of classical chords. But when I'm doing it, when I was just kind of improvising it, I let my guitar playing kind of break down so that my music could have, so that my voice could really implicate the story. And when you think about it, when you listen to it, it's a woman whose husband was killed, who's asking questions, and it's my husband's favorite jazz song. So, it was interesting. Who's asking questions? Where will you go? This is where I'm going to go. Where will you go? This is what happened to my husband. Where were you? So I had to really kind of, the first question. This is where I'm going. And I even had forgotten it. I thought I had it all together because it was almost a light accusation. Where were you? Where did you sleep last night? And then a little bit of desperation and quiet and threatening. Where did you sleep last night? This is what happened to my husband. Where did you sleep last night? So it took me some time, but time and faith and space and form when it comes to emotion is kind of where I kind of take the physics of working with music and letting things fall apart. And then there are some albums that I'm very, very structured. So it depends. And then that's just the difference between, and I think in my mind, like form and formless. But I think personally, and the last thing, people are maybe afraid of formless more than form. I think I'm a bit more afraid of form because when I was young, I was very close to perfect pitch, just slightly relative, and now I'm just all relative, just all. I'm only 40, but I stand, sort of in the front of live shows in front of monitors my whole life. So, I think that freedom in when you want to do a cover. I guess there is a fear in that formless of moving into that form and trying to figure out how to do it yourself. But I think possibly, and it might be something to talk to your friends or community about. Are you more afraid of structure and form than formless musically? Because some may say I'm more open to being creative and interpretation. And the last thing I want to say is George Upton in 1819. He was a very sexist man. If you want to go through the feminist lens really quickly, he wrote that women were, it was impossible for women to create their own music. He felt that their cognition was not there. They could not create original music. They can only interpret it. And then even before that, women were not allowed to perform on stage. In the classical world, you have Fanny Mendelssohn, who was the older sister of Felix Mendelssohn, who did, A Midnight Summer's Dream, who got really famous, but she was the one behind it. Clara Schumann,
Right.
Schumann's wife.
Right.
These are they weren't allowed to be on stage, and you have these guys saying you can't do original stuff. It was a very very tough time. But I thought about it. The sad thing and the good thing, I think, is what made me a very quote unquote successful feminist, because I do go there with the stupid male. And I say, what is that sexism? Was there a time where maybe our women's cognition was not developed because they weren't allowed to and women are highly intelligent. They're naturally, with science, smarter. They have more synapses. They're more da, 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 da. But was there a time that women were taught to sit down, play the harpsichord, and learn their stuff, learn their scales, and were never taught to improvise and create music, so that they were not, that cognition was not developed. So you have this sexist guy going around, but maybe it was just saying, okay, well, this is what I see women doing because that's what they were taught to do. So he
Well,
assumed,
I just jumping in there. I think when you're not allowed to do something and are not
right,
allowed to learn something, you're not going to,
you're not gonna
yes.
do
And,
it.
and again, this is not my field, but I would think as the mind loops, that if you're
Yeah.
only getting certain loops you're not working outside of it, you're not going to develop
Not
as much.
flexing that
So,
muscle.
and that would be with culturally, that's what they said about Black people
And
as
then
well.
write the book
I mean,
about
come
it.
on. It's like
Just like,
if you don't let people do things, if you don't let them, you're really limiting them. And that's an interesting point that we're at today
right,
still. It's like, why are we doing that? I don't understand that. And I was going to
right.
say to your the other idea of we're in a time where maybe structures are falling down and it's okay. It's like maybe that's why we're so uncomfortable, is because things are just being falling down, and now it's a time to rebuild these structures. And that's why that's part of the reason of having these talks is, so how do we take from the past the structures that could move into the future that can assist us, as opposed to just trying to work through it's like we've got a song and we just we have to make it work. It's like, why don't we create a new song, or why don't we create from that song another song? And I think that's where we are in life. And I think that a lot of the young people coming in, younger people like yourself as well, they are more in touch with that. And that's why I think, there's a lot of frustration with older people, not all of us, but, that they're not flexible enough. They're not, to move in this capacity. And it's scary for them too. It is scary for them. So, I mean, maybe that's part of what you're talking, community. How do we help our communities to move and say, these are safe places? Because in the brain, if it's not a safe place, right, we're going to respond in a certain way, because that's how we operate. That's our operating system, fight, flight, or freeze, and we're seeing people freezing. We're seeing people fighting, and some of it's for good and some of it's not. So we're in an interesting time of being able to use music maybe as a vehicle to assisting people to move through this time, is maybe what I'm observing from this conversation a little bit.
Well,
I'm doing away with old forms. Sorry.
if I could just interrupt here and connect what Ellen and Marcus have been emphasizing, and that is the problem for jazz musicians, not only individually but also collectively in ensemble, is how to be in the moment. For an individual, it's flow. For a collectivity, it's groove. And from a neuroscience perspective, it is well known that there is a lag of time, a measurable lag of time. A guy named Libet did this study quite a while ago, where he noticed that there was a fraction of a second, a significant fraction of a second between the time you receive sensation and the time it registers with self-conscious awareness. Given that fact, if you're dependent upon executive function to function, then you cannot be in the moment. And there's a really great bassist in Pittsburgh named Paul Thompson. And I've been interviewing a lot of jazz musicians, and he came up with a really great quote where he said, my big problem is how to stay in the moment, how to play with not thinking. How do I get my mind out of the way, was the actual quote. How do I get my mind? And what he meant by that was really that part of the mind that is involved in slow cognition, which is called executive function, which must function necessarily with a separation, measurable temporal sensation away from the moment. And it turns out that there's this really good book that was written called This Is Your Brain on Music by Levitin. And he's talking with his mentor, Francis Crick, about how to get past this lag of time, which interferes with one's ability to be in the moment and therefore improvise authentically, utilizing very fast cognitive speeds. And it turns out that there are hardwires from the most ancient part of the brain, what one could call the reptilian brain, that bypasses the prefrontal cortex, which is the main place where executive function occurs, although it tends to be global in brain function as well, but goes directly to the areas associated with proprioception. And those hardwires are associated with exactly what Ellen was talking about, which are flight or fight and startle reflexes. And my guitar teacher, when I started back up again, I had quit playing for 30 years until I published my first piece on jazz, and then decided that I better start playing again if I'm going to continue to write about this. And Eric Sissoff, a really great Pittsburgh guitarist, said that the quality of mind that he has when he's playing is as if his life were at stake. But the affect, the emotion involved is not fear, but joy. And you get the sense that what jazz musicians have done in continuing to dismantle executive function in order to be able to play, in order to get the mind out of the way, they emphasize this hardwired connection in order to perform in the moment. So they are, in a sense, transforming a survival mechanism into an aesthetic one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which, given the way that a lot of people see a lot of emergent anger in society, is largely because flight or fight is getting triggered
By the smallest
by,
things.
by small things. And this, and so I think the training the jazz musicians must go through in order to be able to perform in the moment is to rewire themselves in such a way that they can convert a survival mechanism to an aesthetic one.
Wow.
And I'll just leave that there because I would also like to talk about what does distributed cognition amongst members of the ensemble have to do with this. But let me start talking there to open up the conversation.
I want to ask us kind of a simple, I don't know if it's a simple question, but Marcus, how do you as a musician stay in the moment?
Well, okay, I'm going to answer that question, but I do want to kind of add to the form versus the formless.
Okay.
I would argue that formless is a form, and all we have to do is point to the music of Ornette Coleman. Ornette Coleman, largely considered free jazz. I'm not sure if that's. I mean, one of his first records was actually called "This Is Jazz," but I wouldn't be so sure he would call his music free jazz. Although he's probably the most notable musician with that description, because his music was full of everything we've been talking about: call and response, tension and release, the feeling and the idea of the blues, group improvisation. And yes, it's not built on a, say, Tin Pan Alley set of chord changes, 32 bars or whatever, but there's a form to it. And,
Absolutely.
and the form is based on all of the ingredients of this music we're talking about, whether you want to call it jazz or the blues or whatever. And that's the idea that this music has these very powerful internal parts that make it unique from other music. First of all, there's the idea of the blues being double entendre. And you spoke about this earlier, Ellen, about how this music often you could, it would be describing how you're feeling, and there's a certain emotionality in it. Well, there's double entendre, there's irony in the blues, there's the ethos of the blues. All of this sort of is decades that have been from people and how they communicated, whether it was in the work songs or communicated through blues shouts and fill hollers, creating this sort of form of communication. And so once you have all of that, and whether you have a certain form or something that is considered formless, you're still communicating all the way through until you're not. And I Ornette's music, man, there may not be so much as chord changes once you get into the improvisational stage of it, but there is a life to it. I mean, it goes through it, and then there's a natural life to it, and it's all based on that in the moment communication. So I just wanted to kind of jump there because I do think, because I love so-called free jazz music. I play it myself, but I'm also a classicist. I like to play, very the most standards of standards. Embraceable you. I like standards, but I also like to play free. And does my mind change when I play free? Absolutely not. I think what's happening is you're still trying to communicate with your other musicians. You're still building community. I'm listening to the drummer as much as I'm listening to the left hand of the piano player as a bassist. I'm listening to all the voices that are involved in if I'm taking a bass solo as an improviser. And so whether that is playing a set of changes, standard changes, or if that's like, okay, there's no changes, but there's still communication going on. That's another level, I think, that Ornette Coleman took this music. He was laughed at. He was chastised in the beginning. The only people that recognized his brilliance were people like Bernstein. It was like they would go hear Ornette Coleman, in New York City because they knew they were on to something new, taking this music to another level. Everybody else, I'm not even going to name names, but people who we all love thought their music was was crazy, right?
That's right.
But
I just want to jump in for a second because
Yeah.
I say this all the time. I go, the critics back when Ornette first started, oh my God, it was like blasphemy. And then now look at it now. And Monk said that funny thing about when I don't even know if this is a true story, but somebody said this thing about his students. He got an award and his students said, oh, congratulations. And Monk said, it's all bullshit. And he goes, why are you saying that? He goes, because before they used to tell me my music wasn't any good. And it's right, because people haven't caught up doesn't mean that there's nothing to it. Joni Mitchell's Mingus album, when it first came out in the 70s, totally panned. And now it's considered a classic album, right? So you're right. I mean, I think that it's people not being able to maybe see where the next level of communication is going to, which is typical in all areas of life.
And think about how Bob Dylan switched from electric guitar to acoustic. He heard Odetta. He heard this brilliant Black woman folk singer, and he fell in love with Mavis Staples. Okay, so he was on tour and he was going around singing, the Staples family and listening to Odetta, and a lot of his sound, or at least a lot of his guitar sound, is actually and gospel stuff is actually kind of based from Black women, and it's so interesting, how you don't know where it starts, and so I heard that story. As soon as he heard Odetta, he traded in his electric guitar for an acoustic. so yeah, I mean, I remember in general, in fact, I mean, I was not there, but I remember in general in jazz in the 1940s, people were afraid of it. They were angry about it. And I was just talking about rock and roll, how the moving of the hips. And I just have this joke about, women in Atlanta on a reality show. There was a big argument, and then these two, not to dilute myself, but these two women, they were having a big argument, and so they became friendly again, and they were moving their hips, and they said, "Move it around," right? So what the jazz critics and what the rock critics, the white rock critics and jazz critics were really upset about, because Victorian dance, because Baroque dance, because all of that was about footsteps and about movement and about graceful and moving your hands. So they were very upset about the hips movements, in the 50s and 60s and all of that. So the critics of jazz in the early were just really, really, really extremely against jazz, rock and roll, blues, all of that, because it brought something out of their white teenagers that they were like, I don't want this. so I don't struggle as an African American jazz critic, especially a very young African American jazz critic. But you can't buy into the hype, like you were just saying.
Yeah.
You cannot. You have to be very open and love what you love, and do not allow people to abuse you, laugh at you, tear you down. And I think that's what's going on in culture now. The fight towards hurting people who want to continue to be individualists. And I think many times, like, what would happen to David Bowie if he'd come to Earth in 2025? When people are saying that, oh, you have to be like us, not don't be like you. And so and actually, I got a really scary answer from a young person. They would probably terrorize him until he took his life. So that was a response. In this day and age, it's extremely concerning as a social, cultural thinker, writer, as a human being, as a mother, as a Black woman, as everything. But I'm concerned for the entire span of humanity, because I've seen, just a lot of strange phenomenal, like men being aggressive and becoming in groups and bullying one woman. I've seen these scary patterns. My battery is going to die quite soon, but I just wanted to bring it to that, to where you can't buy the hype of, oh, this is good now, because it's at some point it's going to be bad, and it's going to be good again. It's going to be bad, the cycle.
Right.
The dualistic sometimes, but there's also that in between that's really nice, and also the beauty of being really well liked in general. But I've been very concerned about, you've been saying you want to do away with the forms that are not great, that are not healthy, that are toxic in culture, and kind of what to move forward, for everybody. So my general concern is eased a little bit with your intention, to try to break through that.
So I mean, I don't want to, I want to check in because it's 2:30, and I don't want to continue to go too long. You said your battery is going, Jordannah?
Yeah, I probably have about 15 minutes or so.
Okay, so let me just leave everybody with a little moment of putting in, since we're getting towards the end here, of number one, how do you see for yourself in the music that you're creating? Marcus, you're a composer. Jordannah, you're a writer and also a musician. And Martin, you're a musician and a writer and a researcher. How do you see the things that we've been talking about? And we've been a little bit around the world here with it, but overall, what do you think in your own personal life that you could say that is a way that we can move forward with this music? It doesn't have to be any time period, but how do we move forward with the understanding that we have of this music? What could we use it for? How could we use it for the benefit, the social benefit, the humanitarian benefit of others in your own personal life? Because that's a heavy question.
I'm sorry that we have to stop, because I was hoping to get
I
back
know.
to Ornette Coleman and this
Well,
notion of
I can
bifurcation.
switch to a device. Let me actually try to do that now while you're talking. Let's see what we can do.
Okay, and then, but I know, Marcus,
But
you said you had a time limit as well?
I was just committed to the time you sent me, so yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's probably a good idea that we try to wrap it up a little bit if we're gonna lose some folks.
the thing
We'll come
that
back again, Martin, we'll do part two.
I was just going to politely suggest that. But
uh, I think what I'm committed to, despite all the complexities that we're facing with, including artificial intelligence, is understanding what we are capable of as human beings. Uh, and I think there's something that jazz musicians know intuitively through their training that the rest of us need to understand. And I don't make any claims about my musicianship, although I have some claims uh, uh, as a composer, but uh, and especially with neuropathy that I've had to stop performing. Uh, but I think there's something that jazz musicians understand intuitively that the rest of us need to understand. And that is that they recognize the multiplicity of cognition and they recognize that there's certain kinds of cognition that get in the way of being here and being now.
Hmm.
And I think there are other ways to do this as well. And I've always been a fan of various schools of meditation. But I think this is something that could be learned in a lot of different domains. And I see my job, one of my jobs is to try to make this visible and grounded in scientific research
Mm,
so that unfortunately or fortunately, it provides a certain legitimacy
hmm
to the desire at an ethical level to transform ourselves into beings that are life affirming. And I guess something that I haven't emphasized so far in this conversation is that my research is really trying to demonstrate that when people say that jazz is life itself,
mm,
that I mean that in very specific ways, that what occurs at the level of thought for jazz musicians is parallel to the processes of creation in the physical world.
mm,
And that when we are engaged in performing jazz, we are mimicking in some way the processes of creation in nature itself. So let me leave it at there and
mm.
let other people talk.
It's
Well,
beautiful.
I'll just say I'm with Martin on this one, and as far as my personal work, my individual work has always been centered around what do I want to learn, right? I want to learn about myself, about my community, about history, and that always becomes a vehicle of creating music. And doing what Martin mentioned is showing what is our potential, what is our capability, what are we capable of. When you write music about, say, an historical figure like Harriet Tubman, that's exactly what you're trying to get across is you have a lot of potential as a person to do great, to do things that can change the world, in fact. And then when you talk about other stories in history, and these are projects I've personally taken on to try to get a better understanding of music. I think the power of music is really is a lot of things. It's language, it's connectivity, it's the stories that can inspire. But I became a musician, and I mean like a musician, like this is what I want to do in life, after going to a Wynton Marsalis concert and seeing Wynton Marsalis play. This is 1988, and going, oh wow, I don't even really understand his music, but the image and the power of his words and the visual, everything, I saw myself through him, and then began my own journey of trying to become a musician and a composer and a community person. But everything that Martin said is really that simple. You know, it's like when you talk about what can your work do to be part of the solution of fixing what's wrong with our surroundings, is yeah. What are we?
If I could just interrupt for a second,
Mhm.
and what you're describing is a political as well as aesthetic act. And I
Oh,
say that as an amateur historian of World War II
mm.
who knows what Port Chicago was all about.
I was going to ask you about that then. Yeah, that was one of my first stories that I took on, was the Port Chicago mutiny, so to speak. One more thing, and I'll keep it short. And one thing we can't lose sight of is this music that we're talking about, jazz, blues, whatever you want to call it, black music, is the word empathy. When you're performing, you're not trying to sabotage your fellow bandmate that's performing with you. You're actually trying to make them, whoever they are, the best that they can be and sound in every way, however that is musically being transferred. And so that's a form of empathy. And I think that's why the music is healing. I do think that's why the music is uplifting. I played Backwater Blues a couple days ago for this class I was in front of, and I said, I want you to listen to the words very closely. This blues is sung by Bessie Smith. She's singing about a tragedy. She's singing about a flood, you know, like a Hurricane Katrina level of flood. These kids don't know about Hurricane Katrina because they weren't born yet. But I described it to them, you know, town flooding and people losing their homes and some people drowning. But when you listen to the rendering of it, it almost makes you want to get up and dance. The idea of the blues being this dichotomy of tragedy and triumph side by side, much like the Greek theater, you know, with the smiley face, which is triumph, and the sad face, which is tragedy, the human condition that none of us will escape, is really the power of the blues, which gives you a sense of sparkling optimism to move through any tragedy.
It is a cognitive transformation.
Ah, I like that. So that's all I wanted to share.
Yeah, Bessie Smith specifically, being LGBTQ and being, I wrote the book. She raised her voice: 50 Black women who sang their way into music history. And what I didn't anticipate at the end of writing the book, I felt, I cried a few times, a number of times, because I noticed that the women who were born before 1950, 1957 died of terrible, terrible deaths. Billie Holiday being, the way she died, being shackled up, and Bessie Smith, they had tragic deaths. And Betty Carter and Alice Coltrane, who are faves, they died, um, being loved. But I think from the beginning of my career, I tasked myself to begin to put Black women back in the musical canon, the Western musical canon, the jazz musical canon, the blues musical canon, because people were being erased. And
Mhm.
I got the first understanding when searching for Abby Lincoln vinyl. It wasn't even Afro blue; it was just whatever, and it took me months. Finally, the owner of Normals in Baltimore, like, I walk into stores, I'm wont to do, and he goes, like, look what I have. And yet, Max Roach wrote, I think, about 46 albums, and Abby Lincoln wrote 48, you see. And everybody's right. Max Roach, we resist, we insist, which was, Abby Lincoln was very all up in there. So I was very concerned by that. And then going through trying to find that record, I was somewhat sexually harassed. oh, well, I've got a copy at my house. You can come listen to it, but I'm not going to sell it to you. I'm like, ew, well, what did Abbey Roach do? I was like, well, I,
Mm.
so some of the craziest sexism that I experienced. So I started a column via Cisco Bradley at Pratt Institute, the head of the history department. Uh, the column was called Feminist Jazz Review. Okay, because I was like, I can't deal. So over that was 2017, but pre that, I was writing about, Barbara Lynn and Abby Lincoln and a lot of people in BIT in Bitch Media, BITCH Media, and these feminist publications. So by the time Me Too happened, and by the time all of these things happened, I was kind of poised to have these discussions because people in 2013 or so, or 12, 11, were like, why are you writing about RAPE? Why are you writing about rape culture in the music industry, sexism in the music industry, or entertainment in general? And so I kind of did it when it wasn't in the center of conversation, and slowly and in different rounds, quietly, continue to do my work, whether it is making sure that a woman is encouraged, making sure that someone has groceries, making sure that I have at least one female engineer in my work, making sure that the string player in my band is always a woman of color. Like, I just have these little things that I make sure is very important in my music. And also, I think the work within jazz is also, and I've always, feminists can't stand me because I try to include men in the conversation. Do they deserve to be there? Well, yeah, because we're the ones who are trying to convince them it is stupid. And that's a sexist thing for me to say, but who do you want to be equal to? And if you're not talking to them, and if you're not kind of understanding, do you even want to be equal? Do you want a matriarchy, or do you want to be equal to men? You may not want to. So I have to, and then at the same time talking to them and saying, well, here's some practical things, because there were a lot of men who were like, I want to help, I want to write about women, I want to do this stuff, but people are condemning and accusing, and this is again why I get in trouble. Okay. but I just say, well, here's some practical stuff. Here's some books you can read. Here's some things that you can do. When a woman is writing about her pregnancy, you don't have to write about, you don't have experience of childbirth as a jazz musician. You don't have to say, oh, it's flowery. Oh, it's, this or that. Oh, it's sensualist. Or it's this or that. You take it, and does her band have chemistry? What are the chops of the band? What's the syncopation? Give her the same treatment. It doesn't matter if it's about her womb. It doesn't matter if it's about the rain. Because people say, oh, well, this is feminist stuff, but they can also, play McCoy Tyner, which I've seen a young Black woman play McCoy Tyner to the point that I was in tears. So those are the conversations that I have with male critics and men in jazz. To the conversation of, well, I can't really talk to a lot of women about jazz. They don't quite listen to it. So I talked to my mom. I'm like, Mom, you like jazz? She's like, yeah. So these are I think the work in jazz and in music and in all genre is I put it in my daily life. I put feminist practice, intersectional feminist, Black feminist, and general feminist practice in my life, and that's really my work. And then sometimes I'm just pure. I'll write a review. It doesn't matter if it's a male critic, band, or whatever. But just to wrap it up, my work is to make sure that everybody is being written about equally, that people are being taken seriously, and that and then the last thing is that it's fun. Like, a lot of people forget that when you get deep into it, the enjoyment can kind of go away. So I love the idea of empathy, Marcus. But I think when I sit down with my bands, I also want them to have fun, especially if I can't pay them $1 million, especially I can't do this. Maybe that will happen. But really, if when I was young, when I couldn't do that, I wanted to make sure that I created a space in my work. And that's why there's sparseness and kind of minimalism in there too. So somebody who did noodle, somebody who was, could go in and be like, yes, this is a playground, for me. And I'll just buy everybody pizza or Chinese food, and everybody's happy because they had a good experience. So along with being able to hone each other and to learn from each other, challenge each other, and compete with each other, it's also like from my personal experience, from my bands, you're going to have fun, and it's going to be smooth and a great experience. So those are the cores like of my work in jazz.
So, my educator jumps in here, and I'm going to sort of wrap it up a little bit in this way, is that I hear how we can move forward, and we are by just even having this conversation, is I hear this idea of inclusion, I hear the idea of empathy, I hear the idea of devotion, I hear the idea of community, equality, humanity, and educating people, because that's how I mean, even just by playing the music, people are having an experience. And the little extra topic I'm making my soup here is joyfulness, because I know many of us, when we play music, our first intent is we're feeling, we do it because we want to, because it's fun. I mean, that's why we don't get much money, because we'll go in and play for nothing, which is not a good idea for professionals, but people go in because it brings them joy. It is healing. And so from my point of view, when I was a little girl, when my mom was really, she had some, we went through some hard times. And when she would go to the piano and sing, as a little girl, I saw her transform after she sang and played music. I didn't understand it, but I felt it. I observed it. And I think that's how I got to this place in my life where I realized that's healing. This stuff heals, And I always was looking for that. And for me, going into music was a healing experience. And I think it's a healing experience for everyone. Maybe because it is something that we all are able to do, and it's a way that we can express ourselves and get things out. When you talked about the blues, I also heard the comment that the blues, people think the blues is sad. No, the blues is a way to make you happy again, right? It's to get it out, to express it so that you can be joyful. And so for me, my work is, I love doing music. I love improvisation. I just love doing it. It just makes me feel good. But also I do it because I want to help other people. And I have projects that are now around how I can bring that into the world more, kind of like Martin was talking about, how I can bring it out in a way where it's evidenced. So I don't have to prove it all the time, that we have this evidence base. I once sat, a little short story, I once sat and I had a student and she was working on the Mars rover project. And it was her birthday, and she had all these astrophysicists there, And I was sitting next to somebody having a conversation, and I said something like, well, someday in the future, this was in the 80s. I said, someday in the future, they're going to discover how music can heal. They're going to be using it for, medical work and blah, 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 blah. And he looked at me and said, no. And I turned to that guy and I said, you're going to be wrong about that. And after that came out of my mouth, I went, oh my God, I'm saying this to an astrophysicist. What do I know? But he was wrong. Because there are some things that just because we haven't had the tools to examine what it can do, doesn't mean it's not there. We don't know everything. We know some things, and we're trying to understand them. And for me, science is not, it's changeable. It's changeable in that it grows. It evolves with us as we get better tools to examine things. So what we feel as musicians in our heart and what we know to be true, it's true, and that's something that it confounds scientists sometimes, because you can say, oh no, this is, and then we go, and that's a hypothesis for them to go examine. And now we've got people who are doing it. It's to me, it's wonderful, because now I can say emphatically, yes, this does this. Yes, improvisation has this effect, just like, the research Martin has done. Yes, and you and all of us here knew that already. But now we can say to and we can help other people by saying, like you're saying, Martin, this is jazz music, and I've felt this way too, is a way of life. It's a way that we can help people in life. If we can take some of these tools that we use in jazz music to help people to live their lives in a better way, or to communicate better, or to have better relationship, or like you were saying, empathy, that's huge. We need that today. So if we can build more empathy, if we can build more, like I agree with you on the bandstand. That's the one thing about jazz musicians. We're trying to help each other because we're all trying to make the music together. And so we want to support each other. And so all of these beautiful concepts come out of this music. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think it's good for the rest of the world that doesn't know about what jazz music does to understand it's music, but it's more than music. So thank you, Martin, because you've done the hard work of the empirical revelations of it, and being a part of it. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and sharing all your thoughts and your wisdom and your ideas and conversation. And if there's anything you're doing that you want to tell anybody about, websites you want to go to, or anything that you can do if they're interested in your music. Marcus, where can we find you?
It seems like all over the Bay Area they're coming up. I'm doing a number of things, some around Mingus, actually, Piedmont Piano next Saturday in Oakland. What is that, the 20th, 21st, whatever that Saturday is. And a lot of different things. But I'm based in I'm the artistic director for Hillsburg Jazz. And so we have a lot of things coming up in our summer festival in June. And so that keeps me busy.
And a website that if somebody wanted to find your music?
Oh, yeah, they can go to marcusshelby.com, and they can also go to hillsburgjazz.org, or follow me on social media.
Okay, perfect. Jordannah, what about you?
Wow, it seems like I've taken a bit of a break, and now just kind of I'm the opposite of coming up for air, but just beginning again. I relaunched Public Private, my music and arts literary organization. So publicprivate.com, public with a K, Publik, private, private.com. So I've got a number of novellas that I've been releasing on our small press, and I want to grow with that. Also, I've been releasing, I just dropped a song on Valentine's Day. I rushed and tried to get, my family all Valentine's out. And so I released a version of In the Pines that I did just here in my home. And I'm preparing for a 2-track single to follow up The Warm is Low, single one. And the novella version of The Warm is Low, The Deep Blue Sea, which is the second part of a series, has been released. So they both kind of came out around 2017, 2018, 19. So it's taking me this long to do part 2. Yeah. And there are other novellas, 3 more that are going to come out on The Warm is Low. So it's been cool.
Where can somebody reach you if they want to find your stuff? You have a website or any place to reach?
jewriting.com, jewriting.com, and jewriting@outlook.com. You can email me. If I don't respond, just email me again. Sometimes emails get lost. But I'm staying in a bit of a kind of a singular space with my family and things like that. But I'm always open to hear and to learn, and so on. And if you want to write for Public Private, please reach out and contribute. An essay. It can be about pretty much anything, but it just must be, it got to your passion project or your potent space where you're really not trying to get it in more of a publication that's let me just stop there. But,
yeah, okay, they'll reach out to you. All right. Okay. Yeah. Martin, where can we reach you?
Well, I just posted my one of my websites on the chat. It's academia.edu is the site for a lot of academic websites, personal academic websites. I have others too, but that'll suffice. I had 2 essays come out in November, end of November. both of them a little highfalutin philosophical works. One on situating the avant-garde architecture of Arakawa and Gin's between the Zen of Dogen and contemporary cognitive science. And then I have, at the same time, another piece appeared, which has to do with what we're talking about. There's a movement, and one of the things I would argue is that science and philosophy is trying to catch up with us, I believe. I have an essay called The We Turn in Jazz and Cognition, from what it is to how it happens. And it's a response to a Kyoto school philosopher named Yasuo Deguchi, who wrote a manifesto called The We Turn, which is to shift Western philosophical focus from the individual autonomous I to the collective we. And so mine is a somewhat critical but expansive essay on how jazz can inform Deguchi's approach and modify it. And those pieces are available on my website. I'm also on the program committee, as well as a keynote speaker for the Mind and Life Europe conference coming up in Barcelona at the end of May, where I will be giving a talk on neuroplasticity and jazz. And that's coming up from the 27th to the 31st. God, you can hear my cold coming through my sinuses right now. And I'm working on another essay on emergence and jazz with a focus on a certain mistake that Herbie Hancock talks about with respect to performing with Miles Davis early on in his career, having to do with this notion of multiplicity of cognition and how things happen in jazz that seem to correspond to emergent properties in the sciences. So that's enough for now.
Great. And I will, you can reach me on Substack, Sound Creativity Journal.
I've signed up for that. By the way.
Substack, yeah, you're on there. And also, I'm going to have the podcast is also up on Substack, and I will take your information. If you email it to me, I will post it, as well as if there's anything that you're doing, I'll just post it up on there. You can also reach me at ellenjohnson.net. There's too much for me to talk about right now. I just would rather have you guys on here. I can always put my stuff up online. But I will say that, huh?
And please do.
Oh, I will. And I hope you guys will join my Substack too, and tell people about the podcast. So spread the word about that. And we were going to be doing hopefully at least 1 or 2 podcasts a month, Hodge Pod. And part of Hodge Pod, you'll like this, Jordannah, is we have a special episode that's called Feminine Frequencies. And it's all about topics around women, not to leave men out, but to to create better communication about these things and how we can all move forward gender-wise as well, because obviously we need that as well. So I want to thank you, Martin. Thank you, Jordannah. Thank you, Marcus. And thank you for all you're bringing into the world for everybody. I really appreciate that, and for being here today.
Thank you for letting us be a part of this.
Yes, this was wonderful. Great opportunity. Thank you so much to learn and to hear everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.